welcome to Spill the Tarot Tea. I am Aunty K. I am Lakota and Cajun tarot reader and a deck creator. And I have a deep interest in bringing a more decolonial view to tarot and our spirituality and connecting with similar-minded people. And today I have Daniel from Grounded in Magic. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me on. My name is Daniel. I am I use he, him pronouns. I am a Filipino white tarot reader where I work with crystals. I am one part of Grounded in Magic. There's two other people that work with me there. And really what we're doing out there with Grounded in Magic is really trying to work. We sort of see it as the connection or the intersection between magic and social justice, and the way that we can work with tarot and other forms of magic, right, to really like heal from oppression and work through all of those colonial harms that have been put upon us. So yeah, you can find us on Instagram at Grounded in Magic. We also have a website. It's www.groundedinmagic.com. Fairly simple. And then on the side, or maybe by day, however you want to call that, I'm also a critical race scholar and a sociologist who studies racial identity and especially Filipino identity. So I'm stoked to be here and have this conversation. That's amazing.
Thank you so much. For me, I spent a lot of time working with folks in academia, and initially, like I thought spirituality was like separate from those relationships, and I discovered like how much it really isn't, and it's been really wonderful, and so that is really exciting too, and knowing that that you've put that learning and research behind what you're saying, because that's really important. And I say this because, as somebody who was scooped, I was raised with a lot of white ideas. And I just thought like, oh, of course I knew. I was raised in a really racist environment, but I didn't. I didn't. And learning about it was really healing. And partially healing because I wasn't being as harmful as I initially was without knowing it.
Oh yeah, I think unfortunately, I think the spirituality side of things or the magic side of things and academia don't often mix. And I blame academia for this, putting some very hard boundaries there to be like, this is what rationality is, and this is what your rationality is. I mean, the education system is really part of the colonial project. And a lot of us who try to make our way through that educational system, I think there's this point where we have to reckon with this idea that, especially in bodies of color, right, especially in brown bodies, there's this time where you have to sort of reckon with this idea that if I just abide by the rules of academia, like, am I perpetuating white supremacy in a brown body? And that that doesn't make me much better than colonizers. It is different than colonizers, but how am I playing to the colonizers' world and actually having to uphold that?
Yeah.
Which is kind of why we branched off. A couple of us branched off and made this little side thing where we can maybe operate outside of some of those boundaries that academia likes to place around, things like tarot or crystal work or magic. So
yeah, this will be interesting when we get to the hot takes. It's going to be really relevant. Okay, so what is in your tea today?
So yeah, I'm actually drinking. I actually really appreciate this opportunity to sort of just like make tea, because I think consumerism and capitalism make us just like jump from one thing to another thing. And I was like getting ready for this, like, I have to go make tea. And it was just like really common to stop and be like, I'm going to take 10 minutes to do this really intentional practice. But it's this tea from one of our favorite local tea shops. It's called Golden Light. It's a turmeric tea, and it has black pepper and lemon and cardamom in it. So it's a spicy, wake you up, really get you energized tea. And I really like the
Nice.
cup that I'm drinking it out of, just because I'm going to hide the brand because I'm not going to sell a brand. But I love this little slogan of like, be uncommon. I think that's what we should all do.
Yeah, very much. I would agree. I am drinking Mugwort tea today. And it's got honey from my friend's apiary in it. It was just raw herbs in it because I have a lot of those. So it's not really a wake you up tea, but Mugwort puts me in a place I really like to be when I'm having conversations, and also when I'm outside. I like a Mugwort tea before I go outside. I feel like it just opens me up to that natural world a little bit more, and I really enjoy it.
I feel like our teas balance each other out pretty well here.
Yes. So do you have a hot tarot take for us today?
Yeah, so I might cheat here a little bit. I've got the Light Seer deck here. I've got a couple of decks here, but these were the ones that jumped out at me today. Right, but just like the Tower and the Chariot. And
Oh yeah.
And I like the Tower. I actually really like the Tower. I'll turn my ring light
Me
back
too.
on.
I'm waiting for it to happen in real life.
Yeah, right.
System and structure we depend on to actually all crumble down.
Right, just like that proverbial light bulb that just like smashes into capitalism and racism and all. Racial capitalism disappears.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, that'd be that'd be so fun. One day it'll happen, I hope. I feel like there's a little bit of energy collecting out there, and maybe we'll get there. There's lots of people doing really good work on it. So the Tower, I think the Tower is always viewed as this like single instance, and I feel like sometimes when we read the Tower as this single instance of change that comes really quickly, people get really afraid of change. I like to sort of read the Tower as this like ongoing change, that we are constantly always evolving and always in change. I feel like I'm always in Tower space, and hopefully that doesn't mean that my life is just a bunch of chaos, but like I think I become comfortable in the chaos, and not like the racism chaos, but just like the constant growth and the constant change of what the Tower represents. And I think when we view the Tower, right, just as a single instance, then what can happen is we believe that the world and life and growth is really static. So then people become sort of afraid of the Tower. And I think that's what happens, right? The Tower shows up in a reading and people are like, oh no, something's going to happen. I want to be like, you've been changing every moment of your life. Every second you've spent with me has been a Tower moment. You've heard something else, or you've thought something else, and you have changed, and you've had these like micro level Tower moments. And I think when we can sort of shift that way, right, that we are constantly in the Tower, when we get new ideas, right, when social justice movements or social justice ideas are constantly evolving, I'm like, cool, like I didn't know that, and I'm going to learn that now, because I know that I'm constantly in change. Whereas if I don't think I'm constantly in change, when something comes at me, I'm like, oh, this is big for me. This is going to be a big step. So I would hope that we could see it as sort of constant change, because then we can always move forward. And I pair that just with the Chariot. Just briefly, I don't want to cheat and do two cards, but I think the Chariot, right? We talk about the Chariot is moving forward, and I think that pairs really nicely with the Tower, just because we have to realize that there's no way to go back. Like if we're constantly growing, we try to reclaim relationships, or we try to reclaim things that have happened, or like a lot of this like racist rhetoric of like, what was the US like in the past, and like let's go back to that thing because it was so great. Like it wasn't great. But people like hold on to that, right? And I think people try to go back, and like there is no going back, right? We are constantly in flux, we are constantly changing. And if we can see that, right, then we don't try to go back to this like idyllic for white folks,
Yeah.
and men and middle class folk, but not idyllic for people who walk in bodies like ours. So I think just
Yeah.
constantly knowing that, right? Constantly knowing that we're moving forward and that we're in constant change. I feel like those two just kind of go together, and they both popped out of my deck today. So that's where I went.
I really agree with you about the tower being a process. I wrote a spread for dealing with tower moments called In Progress, because change that big, it's a process, and it takes a while to go through. And I relate the tower that way also because it talks about the systems and the structures. And anytime civilization has been brought down for the harms it does, that was a large process. It was a large process that took a long time. And so I'm really, really glad to hear you bring that up, because I agree. The tower is a large process. It takes time to do something that big. For mine, in the spread I did today, I used the Kaleidodope deck, and one of the cards I got is the 9 of Pents. And I had to sit with what this card was talking about, because it was talking about how I embody a healthy embodiment of my sensitive side. And I posted it on Instagram, but I did more thinking about it afterwards. And what came forward initially was an abundance mindset, because it was, my spread was talking about my sensitive side being about sharing and stuff like this. And so I thought about this a bit, an abundance mindset. We often think about a scarcity mindset, and especially as world indigenous folks color, we're more familiar with a scarcity mindset. And I often brush aside the idea of abundance mindset as being a really privileged manifest money kind of deal. But this brought me to think about it on a more emotional level, and about how an abundance mindset won't give all of their self away or all of their needs away, even when they're sharing. And they won't be afraid of that. And I was thinking about, because when I share, it's actually a scarcity mindset that has me give away more than I can actually give away, because I'm afraid about that person's scarcity too. But if I come at it from an abundance mindset, I can share in a healthier way for myself, because that abundance mindset will help me believe like they will get more of this sharing too. It doesn't all have to be from me. And so that was my big insight into the 9 of Coins. And that was this morning. And so I'm still really sitting with it, because abundance mindset is definitely not like a really familiar place to be, so yeah.
I feel like, especially as people of color and whatnot, we're not supposed to have abundance, and we're sort of taught like when we do have abundance, then maybe we are like playing into systems, and to some degree maybe we are, but what does abundance look like? And that's one thing that sort of always has bugged me about tarot, at least early in my tarot adventures, right? Is like abundance was always money, as you were saying. And it's like abundance can be so much more, like this emotional connection or this community connection. And as on the community connection side, I really liked what you said about the scarcity mindset, and like not just your own scarcity, but this sort of like community scarcity mindset, right? Like you're giving away because you have this thought of someone else's scarcity, and how that sort of draws us in. And a lot of us face burnout because of that.
A lot.
I had a mentor once. What, in my work in academia, I was I'm one of few faculty of color in my institution, and students of color are like they gravitate you because they're like, I can see you and you see me and all that. And I had a mentor of color actually tell me that I was burning myself out. Basically, I was like showing up for everything. I was always there because, I was like, these students don't have anything. They don't have anyone else. If I don't show up, then who is going to show up? So again, this like scarcity mindset sort of on the community level. And I had a mentor of color actually tell me, one of a really powerful thing that you can do as you mentor other folks of color is to actually have your own boundaries and to model that it is okay to have those boundaries. And because, white folks are doing the boundary thing all the time, like at least around us, they're like, no, I'm not going to go there with you. I don't want to be in community with you. I don't want to talk about that. And then we pick up all the pieces and then we're burnt out. And then we feel like we've gone through the tower and like, we're just like we feel like we're the tower. That's like the rubble that's been, and we shouldn't be the tower that's crumbled, right? We are like, we're inside the tower, and white supremacy and all of that is the tower that should crumble around us. And then we should feel free, but we don't. We feel like we're the rubble that's on the ground, I think, so often.
Yeah, we do. And it's a really big thing having boundaries. And I've talked about boundaries so much in life. You have to confront that. And am I being capitalistic? Am I doing this? Am I doing that? But thinking about what mindset I'm reacting to is going to be really helpful there. And it's a big thing because we've spent our lives being told that we don't get boundaries. I once heard some advice, I don't know from where, but I pass it on all the time. If you're struggling to set boundaries, start with ones that are smaller and less important to you, because it won't hurt as much when someone breaks them. But you will finally have the strength and the knowledge you need to have to say, so I actually have all these other boundaries. But it can be a way of getting comfortable with somebody. If you're going to break this boundary, that's not going to hurt me as much. Now I know whether or not, we have a relationship where you're going to respect my boundaries.
Oh, yeah. And I think similarly, when we're trying to build boundaries, right, we can try to build those boundaries in small ways. So there's so many things that we constantly say yes to. And like, what if we just said no to them once? Or like, what if we said no to that reading that we don't want to do because it just feels toxic, right? Or it feels like there's this toxic energy coming from the person, or the question that they've posed is rooted in white supremacy or sexism or ableism, or you name it. You can just like, you can tell by the question, you're like, no, I don't really want to go there. But like, what if we start drawing those boundaries and be like, no, I'm not going to do that. And then what we find, right, to some degree, is that the world doesn't end. The world continuously moves on, actually. And I think sometimes colonialism and capitalism can tell us, well, if the world moves on because we didn't do that, then that means that we're useless, or that we're not worthy, or like we're not needed. But I think we can flip that a little bit, right? And that's not the way to think about that. But to think about that as, look how much I was abused by these lack of boundaries that people have been placing on me, right? So instead of it's like it's a glimpse into the power systems that force us to do things that we don't want to do, often because of money, right? Like if you give up that reading, you're like, well, how much money is that, and what am I sacrificing for that? But I think we can think about that just a little bit different, right? It's when I put that boundary out there, like, look how much more freer or how much more liberated I feel. I don't have to answer these questions, or like kind of do the emotional or psychological labor to give an answer that sidesteps the ism that is built into the question. And like, I mean, that's abundance, right? That's sort of that abundance mindset, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it really is. It is an abundance mindset to also say, I have enough that I am going to be okay in my life if I say no to these things that I'm told I actually need. Yeah. So let's get into what your pet spiritual Karen peeve is, or spiritual Kevin, as it may be. What is that thing they do that just that just bothers you, that impacts you, you know, as a Filipino person, as a brown person, moving around in spirituality, and in spiritual communities?
Um, I've thought about this a lot, and I was like, what am I going to say? And I don't know. It's like there's so many that I could just be like, I could talk on this for hours. But I think one thing that is really bothersome, right, is this idea of like spirituality is something that can be achieved. Like there's an end goal, and that there are people who like get it. I'm like very in process apparently. But like there are people who get it and they've like achieved this goal and they've used it as their identity, right? Like they are, I don't want to say woke, but they're like spiritually woke, right? They're like enlightened. I guess enlightened maybe is the term that we're looking for here.
Yeah.
And if you don't sort of align with that, then like something's wrong with you. And it's just like, this is the same stuff that you have been telling us through colonization, that we have to sort of fit into your group, right? I think like, and it's literally what they did in the Philippines, right? Like the whole acquisition of the Philippines by the United States from Spain after hundreds of years of colonization was basically Spain giving the Philippines to the United States through this like fake war thing, or like this fake battle that transferred, as if you could transfer a whole country to another country. But that's a whole nother story. But like the president of the United States didn't want to acquire the Philippines, and then he like sat there and prayed about it, and then was like, oh yes, we can't let them go because like we have to Christianize them. Like Filipinos are this infantile class of people, and we have to go save them. We have to go Christianize them, otherwise they'll like run amok and they'll basically run themselves into the ground. So I feel like there's a lot of colonial trauma, right, that gets passed down across my own lineage, so that when it's this idea of this is the way to be, these are the rules, this is how spirituality has to be, right, that's just like super triggering to me. I'm like, no, there are no rules, and if there are rules, then like that's really just a colonial mindset. So I all of that to say, I guess like the way that enlightenment, right, gets tied to an identity that says like I have arrived and I don't ever have to grow. Because if you call these people out, right, if you like say like, hey, this thing that you're doing is pretty racist, like the way that you read that card is pretty racist, or that like, why are you gendering these cards? Like they don't necessarily need genders. And you know, if you call them out, they're like, oh no, like I've done my work, I've got it, I'm so good. Like I used to think, and like now I'm so much better. And it's just like it just screams of that colonial mindset of like, you to be in my world, you have to catch up, and you always have to catch up. And then when you do catch up, I'm gonna move this stick again because I don't actually really want you in this space.
Come to that exact same enlightenment, folks. When I've talked about my relationship with certain cards that carry heavy colonial things attached to them, Hierophant, justice. I don't interpret, I interpret justice as I interpret justice in this world. That's how I see this card. I take it for what it really is in this world. And it's always that they're enlightened. They're above that. They've grown beyond our negative human attachments to cards, because if we find them racist, if we find them sexist, that's because we're not enlightened. And it's it is so much like Christianity. It really is. It is that exact same attitude. And it's funny because many of those same people, not always, sometimes they are Christians, but many of them have, left Christianity's toxicity and we're now Wiccans or pagans or what have you. And it's like, you've brought that exact same attitude. You've not, they didn't do what I did when I left my scoop home to find community and realized, oh, I brought all my family's racisms with me and I just didn't know it. They haven't sat down and said, oh, I brought all those Christian like toxicities and white supremacy with me. And they have, and I see it too. And sometimes in other ways, to us at powwow, we'll have a Thanksgiving address where it's like a prayer, and it sounds like Christianity with like God crossed out for creator along the way.
There's a lot of decks out there that I think do representation. And I'm like, oh, this is super stoked. I want to buy a deck. I can't think of one right off the top of my head, but like I buy it because I'm like, wow, there's people that kind of look like me. And then you read the guidebook and you're like, oh, that's the same thing. Like you didn't actually play with this. And then it feels it's fake, right? It's capitalistic. It is, I'm doing this because I know people like me are looking for representation in tarot, so I'm going to buy them. And it's a disservice to myself. It's also a disservice for people that I read for, right? Like, I don't want to read for people. It's great if they can see themselves, but again, I don't want to read for them with a deck that isn't made for them.
It shows up in the numbers too. I have very few white clients, so so I need to know that if I buy your deck because I want a deck that's going to show my clients to them, they're probably seeing 5 cards if I'm reading for them, so they're not seeing the whole deck. And so if only a quarter of the deck is people of color, they're probably not going to see themselves, or they're going to see themselves very specifically tokenized in that spread. And that's my problem when that diversity sits around that 25-30% mark. It's like, I know you tried, I know it was your intent, but it's not actually enough to make a difference for my clients. It might make a difference if it was my personal deck. Probably not. For some it might, but it's definitely not going to make a difference for our clients if we're unlikely to draw a spread full of them.
And as you say that, I think this is why for so long I was drawn to decks that have animals and like other creatures, because then they just weren't white people. And I still I like the connection with the animals and whatnot, because I feel like that does connect us to land, and that's really important. But also, like, how messed up is that, right? That I had to go and find decks that were monsters or animals or things like that, because like that's the only way that I could escape sort of the white supremacists and sexists and all of that depictions, when society has also been telling us that people of color are like animals. So here I am finding myself represented by animals on this like meta level where racism has also told us that people of color are animals, right? And like that's some weird meta messed up racism stuff going on there.
But I think the majority of people of color I know prefer animal decks for the same reason. I've actually always felt like a freak. I struggle with the animal decks always. I struggle with it. I struggle to pull the people and their lives out of those images. And, it also impacted, my struggle with that also impacted me on like an imposter syndrome place. It's like, what kind of native can relate to an animal deck? But also, I really like you drawing attention to the fact that, the other side of this that we don't talk about, we just talk about the fact that too many of us read animal decks and plant decks because we don't have to worry about representation. But many of us read animal decks to get over the representation issue but that is exactly what they've always said about us. And I get it because I bought animal and plant decks hoping to connect to them because I knew I wasn't going to open that deck up and be frustrated or hurt or disappointed before I was done flipping through the deck on my first look at it.
Oh yeah, totally. On the imposter syndrome note that you mentioned, right? I think that's also really important because when the representation isn't there, like a lot of us sort of open up the deck and go like, well, the Hierophant, like how am I supposed to connect to that? Like that's literally the position of power that guided the colonization of my ancestors. Like I have struggled with that card for so long and have finally kind of made a little bit of headway on it. But like, especially when it is depicted as the Pope, right? It's just like, no. I have to flip through cards, look at that card. If it's the Pope, I'm like not buying it, not even coming close to it. But on imposter syndrome, right? If that's the kind of experience that a lot of us are having when we open a deck, like how many of us have been steered away from this, right? How many more people would be connected to tarot or connected to other practices if when they opened up a deck, they saw themselves? And, you know, that's sort of the way that we're sort of keeping tarot also light, right? It's just like, it's not like you can't be here, but like if you can't see yourself, then you just leave yourself. And then we're sort of this idea of like, well, they're not here, right? So again, like going back to the table analogy, like you have to make your table safe, and a lot of us won't come to the table, and then we get blamed for it because it's like, well, I opened it up, I said that you could come, and then you didn't come. Just like we made tarot decks, we tried to invite you, but you didn't come, you're not showing up. So like where are the readers of color? Where are queer readers? Where are, you know, indigenous readers and things like that? Because people like creators
and tell you where some indigenous readers are. When I told my indigenous friends who read tarot, and there's like a small group of us who have our own little tiny Facebook group of like 24 people. When I was like, yeah, I'm gonna like read professionally beyond like my community and put myself out there on the internet, and they're like, you're going to go on the spiritual internet? Do you know Karen's out there? And that's why, because that table has been unsafe for so long. Like I was afraid to go to it. My friends have been afraid to go to it. I've been pleasantly surprised. There's wonderful, you know, internet spiritual community out there that is inclusive, but like, I'm not saying that to say Karen's gone, because she's still there in the majority. And it's hard and it's painful. Even if you curate your page and who you're following, you know, she's still on everybody's page.
It's so just like, if you don't like what I'm saying, just click the unfollow button. Like, I don't know where the sense of entitlement and the privilege comes from that you think you have to, you know, berate me for what I've said. Just click the unfollow button and go. I mean, that's basically what you tell us to do. So follow your own advice there.
Yeah, all the time. I block all the people that irritate me. I don't want to be irritated when I'm doing the whole social media thing, because it's partially social and it's partially work, and I don't want to be irritated. So I'm a heavy user of the block button.
Yeah, but I think you curating your own followers, right, is sort of that abundance thing that we were talking about way in the beginning here. Is just like it does help on your part, but I think you're also creating that table for other people like myself who follow you, right, to come to that table and feel like we're connected and that we actually belong there. So I know a lot of it, sometimes we're thinking about it as like doing it for yourself, but I think you do it for all of us. And I think that's really appreciated on our end, so that we know that we're coming to a table that wants people like us to be there.
Yeah. I think that aspect of it on social media is important. If I post something, I feel responsible to check those comments. And I wish more people did. check your comments, because if you're getting hurtful comments on your posts, you need to be responsible for the people of color who are following you, and delete those, tell them no, get rid of them, block them, whatever. Don't leave them there for us to deal with. Don't make PSA to allies watching this. Don't make a post as an ally if you don't have the time to follow the comments all day. Because you're not helping us if you're not on top of those comments. Where do you come across this enlightenment aspect the most in your spiritual practice?
It's weird because I'm trying to think of, like, can I pinpoint like a specific example or a specific space? But I feel like it's just like woven into everything, right? Like it's just kind of like, it's like racism. It's just like constantly there, and it's woven into like really subtle comments that you see online. It's woven into like Facebook groups and things like that. So I don't know if I can. Yeah. It still feels like a non-answer.
It really is one of those things. And I wonder where, I like to wonder sometimes where the roots of things like that, it has to come rooted specifically in Christianity, this idea of enlightenment. But, I don't think I've heard about the concept of enlightenment from any of my own teachers, actually, if I think about it. But the idea of becoming enlightened is definitely what a lot of spiritual people are striving for on the mainstream. Have your teachers ever actually talked about enlightenment as like a thing?
As you say that, no, right? I think a lot of mentors and teachers that I've worked with talk about healing and going back, right? And it's about healing and reconnecting and reclaiming, which is interesting because I feel like healing and reconnecting and reclaiming is really about growing roots down into the world, right? And reconnecting to the land that we have been removed from because of colonization and capitalism and whatnot. Whereas enlightenment sort of has this idea of kind of like levitating away, right? And it almost like sort of further removing us from the land. And I think, getting your feet dirty, getting those roots really further in. I think that's what healing is, right? Healing's about coming in and then rooting down so that you can grow. Because if you grow without roots, you're just you'll just fall over, right? So I think I haven't heard, I feel like a lot of mentors and teachers don't talk about enlightenment. They talk about healing and reconnection.
And this isn't it. Yeah, because I hadn't thought about this before either. I've not had teachers speak about enlightenment. You haven't. They talk about the same things, getting grounded, digging roots. And Christianity is afraid of everything under the ground. They're afraid of the idea of going down. And we're not. Like, going down is where you heal, right? Like, we go into a sweat lodge to be in the womb of the earth, because that's where you heal and that's where you grow and that's where you gain insight. You're visioning, a lot of times you'll dig a pit and go into that pit. Everyone thinks of an Indian sitting on a hilltop or a mountain with their hair blowing, but most of us dug pits. And you go into that pit for that vision quest, right? Or for that visioning or that dreaming. Growth happens under the ground before it happens above the ground.
Oh yeah. But colonizers don't like to get dirty, right? I mean, like, that was like one of the ways they differentiated themselves too, right? It's like, those people over there, they're dirty. Look at them, like, they don't dress the right way. They're always like filthy, and like, look at us, we're prim and proper, and we have our gatherings and things like that. So they like do not want to come into contact with the dirt or the earth. Because if you get in contact with the earth and you reconnect, right, and you reconnect to those those practices from communities of color, like it's hard to exploit the earth that you live on. But like that's what capitalism is built on. You have to be able to exploit the earth to build more money so that you can, I don't know, like have billions of dollars. Why you need $1 billion, I don't know. But you can't thrive in capitalism unless you're able to exploit the earth. So
yeah. I don't think you probably can in any form of capitalism. Its roots were based on that. Its roots were based in all that. I don't think there can be a healthy version of it. It's always been resource heavy, resource dependent. Its offshoots, socialism and communism, have also been equally environmentally destructive, and equally destructive to Indigenous folks often. Yeah.
You had asked, and I think this kind of links back to, right, is about where I see it specifically. And I think what's coming as you're talking, and I'm thinking more, right, is about those places where there are people who have left Christianity and have like found alternative forms of spirituality, whether that comes through tarot or crystal work or whatever kind of work they're doing. And I'm like, great, you've evolved away from Christianity, perhaps, right? And but I feel like there's a lot of toxicity there, as you were saying, because that's where they feel like they've achieved this like enlightenment because they moved away from this thing that has already been oppressed, or that they now see as oppressive. And therefore, because they moved away from that, they have evolved and therefore have done the work. So it's almost harder, right, to talk to these people sometimes, because they're like, but look at how good, and they build their identity around no longer being oppressive when they are engaging in oppressive actions. And when they build their identity around that, when you tell them that, it becomes really hard for them to hear it. And then they point to this journey away from Christianity, in which I'm like, yes, I want to acknowledge that. And I want to validate that was a hard journey for you. But you also have to see that, again, right, enlightenment is not something that you have arrived at. It is an ongoing process, and you will always be in it. We're always in the tower. And you have to accept that so that we can continue to move forward and continue to be in community together. Because when you stop growing, I can't be in community with you because I know that I'm still growing, or it becomes hard to be in that community.
Yeah, it makes it difficult to be in it for sure.
But I think that's where some of this enlightenment can come from, or if we want to call it enlightenment or whatever we want to call it, right, is like healing those deep core wounds. Because when you get rid of racism, like imagine and it's really hard, right, but what kinds of things will you be able to imagine in the world when racism doesn't exist, right? What kinds of things can you imagine actually existing in the world when sexism and heterosexism go away? And those are things that, while we're stuck in the system, it's really hard for us to see because the system doesn't want us to see them. Because if we see them, we start demanding them. And like that's what sort of really excites me about like my own readings, right, in the way that I work with the cards, even for myself, is that it gives me glimpses into the world that could be, so that it can fuel us to say, I'm going to demand this world that makes me worthy, that I'm worthy of, right, as compared to living within the constraints of the current systems that we have, because systems want us to be limited. They don't want us to be expansive in our thoughts. But we can't just jump to the expansive thoughts without going back and deeply rooting into the world and healing those core wounds. And I think that's where this enlightenment thing, they want to skip the deeply rooting and healing the core wounds and pretending those don't exist, and then being like, oh, I'm good, I'm expansive in my thought.
Yeah. And I think that's bringing me back to the Hierophant, and their enlightenment takes and all these positive things in this really toxic card. One of the things I do with it now is I primarily read it for what it is in my reality, as for the oppressions that it is and all that. If we can't get rid of the Ten of Swords, because we need to be able to read that card at times, I'm going to keep all the negativity of the Hierophant. In some ways, the negativity makes sense for me, because when I think about the other 5 cards, I can see like how the Hierophant like caused hurts in each of those places, right? And say, yeah, no, this is just negative. But what I think I like most about this conversation is it gave me new ways to think about enlightenment, primarily in the fact that I think it probably is a white thing. I've not been taught this. I don't need to go and find this enlightenment I'm always being called down for by these people, because my teachers never told me to go find it. And I'm really thankful we had this long journey of a conversation through this, because as much as I've turned my nose up at those folks, this conversation really helped me see why it's a thing I don't need to worry about.
Oh, totally. That sounds awesome. You've reached enlightenment on enlightenment.
You broke the code on enlightenment. It's just whiteness. You can let it go. So for Hit the Deck, what is something you are just so over in tarot decks? We've covered some of this, but yeah.
I feel like we've woven some of that in there. To run with the Hierophant thing, I just feel like all the rules of tarot, like those can all go away. I feel like there's like, I'm in some social media groups, right, where it's like people are like, how do I learn? People are like, how do I get a deck? And like this whole like lie that someone has to buy you your deck, which kind of makes sense, because then you get a mentor. Hopefully that person who buys you your deck then becomes your mentor, and then you build a brand, but that's usually not how it works. But like all the rules are like, how do you shuffle, and how do I know? So many people have posted online where they're like, am I reading this right, or did I shuffle these correctly? Did I pull the cards correctly? Just like there's people.
Yeah.
Just last week I read someone's comment that was like, I've had this deck for like 3 months. I've been reading the book. I've still not pulled a card from the deck. And I just want to be like, pull a card. Like build the connection, right? Like stop this idea of perfectionism needs to go away, so that it's
like
just like
dogma.
Yeah,
it's like the dogma of tarot.
yeah. I'm so like scared of the deck, or like I think the deck gets put on a pedestal, right, as if it has all of the answers. Yeah. It's like the deck helps you work through things to get to answers, and the rigidity of all of that, I think, is just like, so it's what put me off on tarot for a while, early on in life, where it's like the court cards are men or women. I'm like, well, that's weird. And then people are like, I have to go, it's going to be a man, this older man's going to come and give you this advice. I'm like, okay, well, I was like, who's the older white dude that's going to come give me advice? Because
the exact same question.
Do they exist?
Why put that King of Swords away? I'm never meeting him.
Yeah. So like, yeah, all the rules and all of the even like just the rigidity around gender, and like, this is exactly what this card means. And I think what you're saying, right? I'm going to read the cards in ways that resonate with my lived experience, and what I get from it is what I get from it. And I think that's the power. That's the revolutionary part of it, is that for once we could possibly have something that doesn't have to abide by rules. Like colonialism wants us to follow all of the rules, that's white supremacy. And so I'm just like, oh, I like decks that have like, here's some things that you could think about, right? Like even in their guidebooks, they're not necessarily like prescriptive. They're not, this is exactly what this means. This is exactly how you should read this.
Yeah.
If we could get away from the rigidity and the like holding it up as if it's just like perfect and like we have to be perfect in it, I think that would be powerful to unlock tarot for so many people and help tap into that revolutionary.
I think it would help folks.
Yeah.
I don't see my deck as sacred. As far as I'm concerned, it's a dictionary. This is a dictionary, and it's going to translate for me messages from spirit. And if something happens to it, I can go buy another dictionary. Like that's how I see it. It's a translation tool. I didn't run into the rules and the dogma in tarot till later. So I feel fortunate with that. But I mostly learned from people, real life, pre everyone on the internet. And I think I see the dogma more in like online groups. I think that's where I run across that more. Yeah.
So maybe that's what could go
away.
Just over those groups where they just like shut people down and are like, no, you're not ready, or like you should be reading this. And like, even when people seek advice online, they're like, I did this reading, what do you all think about it? And it's, to some degree I want to know, like, what did you get out of it? What do you see in it? Because I can only enhance the message that you've gotten. I can't actually give you a new message, or I shouldn't give you a new message. Like, they're not my cards. I didn't create that sacred space to work with them like you did. So whatever you got there, that's you. And that's that high priestess and empress energy that colonization wants to get rid of. And I'm like, you can trust that. Like that's part of the decolonial process, right? Is to really embrace those new ways of knowing, or old ways of knowing that colonization didn't want us to know about.
My hit the deck is it was context, but okay. So I found when I come across problematic tarot decks, the problem often comes down to context. And putting people in without context, without research, which became, the lack of research became most ironic when I got the Women of Science Tarot by MIT. I don't think a lot of the cards have context to who they are, to the card itself, but it comes up as problems in other ways. This talks about women of science, right? It talks about their scientific things. So they bring up Ursula Le Guin as an intergalactic anthropologist. They don't talk about any of her cool or awesome politics.
Yeah.
They bring up this woman for her, being a doctor and a suffragette, but they leave out the context of how she fought for women's rights, which the book White Women's Rights lays out. She used science, the science showing how white women were more like white men than people of color. Science. And then context matters. If this is what white people look like in their skin tone, then like, I don't know. Does it look like I'm holding 3 white women up here? Because this person is actually a Black woman.
Oh my God.
When I Googled her on the internet.
Oh my gosh.
Context matters.
Yes.
You have to do the research when you're putting historical images and historical people into decks, because if you don't do your research, you might color a Black woman white and neglect to mention she was one of the highest ranked African Americans in medicine. Or you might, not notice that you put a racist in there beside the internet. Like, context matters, and I would like to see context in my tarot decks. I would like, when people are sourcing images or sourcing historical figures or situations or places, to like do the full research. Do the full research. You can't just look up a scientist and say, what a great person, they invented this, because like science has a huge history of racism, especially if you want to make it historical. So that's my hit the deck. But yeah, context matters if you want to make an anti-racist deck or an inclusive deck, which goes back to that conversation about making the table safe.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how many women of color you put in a deck if you colored some of them white and included racists.
Oh my God, yeah. And like people, whoever created that deck probably feels really good about themselves, right? They're like, look at this awesome thing.
It was created by a whole bunch of women. It was a collab deck by women at MIT. It just blows my mind that this is where they failed to do research.
Well, like I said, the Academy is part of the Colonial project, so not overly surprised that the Academy would produce something less than just and equitable.
Yeah,
a lot of the people in the Academy, I don't know, people in the Academy think they have arrived. They think they know better than other. There's a reason people who aren't in the Academy don't like people in the Academy.
intensely aware of this. I've always been paid less. Panels, symposiums, I'm always paid less. I've been interviewed for folks writing courses, paid less. Last year was the first time I was paid equally. So yeah, I'm so fully aware of all of that.
Again, I'm not surprised, but also just like deeply bothered by that. And I think that's part of that.
Yeah, it's not surprising, but it is absolutely expected. I have to agree there. So 60-second tarot, grab a deck, shuffle it up, and let's see what comes out.
Cool. So I pulled a card. I pulled it from the Gentle Tarot, which is an amazing deck. I love this deck. But
I do too.
I have pulled the Empress.
Oh, the Empress. Nice. All right. Gonna have to think about the Empress. Okay. I used my land back tarot deck, and I pulled the 5 of Drums or 5 of Pents.
I feel like these are both very appropriate cards for the conversation that we have had.
I think so too.
I feel like 60 seconds is going to go by really quick.
Oh, it's gonna go by so fast. On our marks, get set, go.
Like that was the most stressful part of this whole
I
thing.
drew mine, but I feel like no one's gonna be able to tell what it is. How did yours go?
Oh, it's a rough sketch, but yeah. So 5 pentacles. I just really drew this thing. Let me see how far can I get.
This is good. I can see this.
Cool. So there you go. I just think of like the ways that we become sort of, that scarcity mindset. And I feel like the way that like capitalism kind of like forces us into the scarcity mindset and like this like feeling of sort of just like not necessarily feeling like we have less than what we actually have, and like we don't have to go that. I think what I want to bring out in this, right, is what I like to bring out in readings is also that's like we don't have to go that way. We've been tricked to think that that's the route that we have to go, and when we go that route, we sort of feel this like, oh, it just feels like dread, and it feels so heavy, and like, what if you just took the left, right? And like, what if we weren't driven by pentacles and money and capitalism? What if we took another abundant view and we went, those are supposed to be flowers and sun and stuff, and yeah.
Nice.
Like, there's another way. So it's kind of where I went with that.
I like that. There is another way. So the Empress frequently is shown as a woman in wheat. And folks are not going to be able to tell this. So this is a canoe, the front of a canoe, and a person with a red shirt and jeans sitting in it, and a paddle. It's the worst drawing ever. And they're in the water, and this is all the wild rice, and they're harvesting the grain off the wild rice, and you like bring it over your canoe with the paddle and like whack it so the grain drops into the canoe. So that, yeah, it's very abstract in this, but that's what I was going for.
Yeah, I love that. That's awesome.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This was a really enjoyable conversation, and I'm really thankful you came on here and we did this. This was great. I'm going to remind folks that you can find Daniel at Grounded in Magic on Instagram and on the internet. And Grounded in Magic is a team, and they are producing some great decolonial, anti-racist work in magic that you can follow along with. So please do that, folks. All right. Thank you so much.